Is this the moment of truth? When historians come back to look at Britain's relationship with Europe, is it now they'll talk about? Or will they focus on something else? Will it be the Leave vote in 2016? David Cameron's Bloomberg speech a few years earlier? Or what if the events we're living through were really set in train when we were looking the other way? When our eyes were glued to the Olympics? When we celebrated the Diamond Jubilee? What if the seminal year, the moment our fate became preordained, was 2012?
We didn't notice it at the time, but a chain reaction was happening beneath our feet, causing ripple effects that we're still feeling now. This is the story about how seemingly unconnected events in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and most of all here in Britain, have left us where we are today. It is the story about how 2012 was the year everything changed.
It might seem an odd year to choose. In some senses, 2012 was the year of Europe's greatest triumph. Awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, fated as the world's most advanced, civilized continent. And you can understand why. It's the ultimate story of turning defeat into victory. It's impossible to tell Europe's story without considering this, the aftermath of the Second World War. A continent in ruins, and a question: how to make conflict like this a thing of history.
In 1946, Churchill gave a famous speech where he called for the creation of a United States of Europe. No longer would the continent be locked in conflict, it would be locked in political union. But ever since then, we've been asking ourselves the question, what about us? Are we in the club or out of it?
For much of that time, the answer was focus on the economic relationships, steer clear of the politics. But every 5 years came a new European treaty, adding more EU power, increasing integration, creating a closer and closer union. And when was the next treaty due? 2012. But then events intervened. The euro crisis in Spain, Ireland and most obviously Greece was a reminder that the project had some serious problems. Greece was bailed out, but only on terms so harsh it suffered an unprecedented depression.
For many liberal Europhiles, the Greek crisis was the real turning point. Up until then, they'd been able to hold up Europe as this defender of human rights, this bastion of liberal democracy, but now all of a sudden it was imposing economic pain on one of its most vulnerable members. In other words, 2012 was the moment Europe lost many of its most important intellectual defenders.
The euro crisis posed another problem. It caused a dive in Britain's economy.
Up until 2012, it looked like the UK economy was going to recover relatively quickly. There were only another few years of austerity yet to come. Then the euro crisis happened. Austerity had to be prolonged, the economy suffered, living standards fell, and the gap between the haves in the city and everyone else only widened, something that many people think contributed to their eventual decision to leave in 2016.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, the Arab Spring was turning nasty. 2012 was the year the Syrian civil war really took hold. And as millions of displaced refugees from the Middle East and North Africa looked to escape, the seeds of Europe's refugee crisis were planted. A chain reaction of events that landed with a thump here in Westminster.
And now, once again, all eyes on this place as MPs decide what the next chapter of Britain's relationship with Europe is. The club we can't quite decide whether we want to be in or out of. But if there's one thing history has taught us, it is that this story is not going to be over anytime soon.
Anyway, the eventual outcome is likely to be out of the politicians' hands. Ask David Cameron. 2012 was the year he decided privately to call an in-out referendum. The polling was telling him Britain would definitely vote Remain, but beneath his feet, the earth was shifting. Deeper austerity, the gap between haves and have-nots, economic depression on the continent, a refugee crisis brewing, and a nation rediscovering its pride in its own flag and its own identity. In hindsight, it's so obvious. The ingredients were all there for the Leave vote 4 years later, but we were all too busy looking the other way. Ed Conway, Sky News.